a lot of which is about the egg and the developing embryo and so forth. But for now, let's talk about some of the adaptations birds have. So, birds are another group of vertebrates. They're have all the characteristics of animals and the other vertebrates, but they also have some unique adaptations, many of which are necessary in order for them to be able to fly well. Okay. Obviously, flight is a characteristic. Not all birds fly. Most do, most kinds. But as birds evolved the ability to fly, there's several adaptations that were necessary in order for that to work. And one of those has to do with the bones of a bird. If you, like when I was in college, I took a class all about just birds, and we were able to pick up birds. And if you have like a pretty large bird, say an owl, a large owl, if you were like to hold it in your hands, I know you've probably never done this, but it's very, very light. You know, if you had an equal size, whatever, beaver in your hands, the beaver would be much, much heavier. The bird's very, very light. Okay? And part of that has to do with this first adaptation, which is its bone structure. Anyone know what the bones of a bird, how they may be different than the bones of other animals, Chloe?
Like hollow?
Yeah, they're not like 100% hollow. I know I'm going to say it up here, they're lightweight and hollow, but actually, it's not hollow kind of like a straw, but they have in between those hollow areas, they have these strands of bone tissue crisscrossing across it. Here's an actual picture of a real bone, and you can see these fibers of the bone tissue. What do you think? So, what do you think those fibers are for? They're also important. Holly?
The bones strong.
Yeah. If it was just a hollow bone, it would be very fragile and easy to break. But these crisscrossing strands of bone tissue actually sort of reinforce the bone, make it much stronger without adding a lot of extra weight to it. Because the lighter it is for the bird, the easier, more efficient flying it's going to be. Okay, reproduction. Like we've been talking about in each of our groups, we talk about fertilization. So birds have fertilization like reptiles. Which was what? What did we say about where the egg gets fertilized in reptiles and in birds? Daniel?
Internally?
Internally. Same thing is true of birds. So in birds, okay, male bird has reproductive organs that it uses to deposit sperm cells into the female bird's reproductive tract. Those sperm cells make their way to the egg, fertilize the egg, so it gets fertilized internally. Once that happens, again, it's similar to a reptile, because what happens after the egg is fertilized? Yeah, the rest of the egg forms and then they lay eggs. The eggs are released from the female, are laid somewhere in a nest or something like that. And then they finish up their development externally, outside of the body. So they have internal fertilization, external development. Birds are warm-blooded. And this is the first group we've talked about that are warm-blooded.
Can we go to the self-care?
You know, we'll talk about that in a minute, Israel. I'm glad you brought that up, but we'll hold off till the next slide. So they're warm-blooded, which means they can tolerate a wide variety of temperatures. You know, you've seen, what's that show about penguins? Happy Feet, I was thinking. Or remember a while back, March of the Penguins was like popular?
I remember. What was
Like
that
a documentary about penguins. But anyway, penguins live in extreme cold conditions. And they're able to, but they keep a high body temperature. They're warm-blooded, but that requires what?
Feathers.
Well, feathers help insulate it, but it requires to keep a high body temperature, a lot of food. You need to eat a lot. Yep.
How do they do that when don't they huddle together and
Yeah, that helps to make it easier for them to maintain that high body temperature. Just like you maintain a high body temperature, but when you're cold, you shiver or you like sort of, you like curl up in a little ball because it helps you to keep your body temperature up. Birds have the four-chambered heart. What did reptiles have? Who can remind me about reptiles? Holly?
3.5.
3.5. But if you look at the heart of a bird, it's a full 4-chambered heart. So right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, left ventricle. 1, 2, 3, 4 chambers. What's the benefit of this? How is this helpful to have 4 completely separate chambers in the heart? Haley? There's no mixing of oxygen-rich blood and oxygen-poor blood. They're kept completely separate. And this is important. This gets the maximum amount of oxygen to all the body cells. Because the blood, if you think about how this works, so blood that's at all the body parts of the bird, and its wings, allowing it to move around, fly. That blood gives up its oxygen, and so it's low in oxygen. Comes into the heart here, goes into the ventricle. Now where does that blood have to go? The blood that's low in oxygen needs to get somewhere. Daniel?
Would it be low in oxygen?
Yep.
To the lungs?
Yeah, it needs to get to the lungs, because once it gets to the lungs, what can happen?
It can get filled.
Yeah, it can get new oxygen. So this blood, because they're separate, this blood gets sent right to the lungs. Gets reoxygenated. Then that blood returns back to the heart. But now, it's not going to come onto this side of the heart.
It's going to go on the
It's
other
come on this side. So this oxygenated blood from the lungs comes in, goes in the ventricle, then gets pumped out. But now, where can it go?
Around the body?
All around the body to provide new oxygen. And then when it goes back to the heart, comes in the other side, goes to the lung. So we have this system of 2 separate types of circulation. One to get sent to the lungs, one to get sent to the body. And it's the most efficient way of getting oxygen to the cells. Daniel?
If the 2 types of blood got mixed, would that be deadly?
Well, yeah, sometimes there's could be a hole or a gap in that wall. It's not, it sometimes can be deadly, but not necessarily.
There's a lot of
And so in the other animals we've been talking about where there is mixing, it just means some of the blood that gets to the body cells is going to be lower in oxygen, so it's not going to get as much oxygen to the cells. Matt?
So if there was a hole in one of the walls, could it heal itself? Just like not.
I mean, sometimes people are born with a hole between the chambers and they have to repair it surgically.
Like that.
Yeah.
How birds fly, is it also something with the lungs, like they sort of helium? It's like
No, they can take in a lot of oxygen because their cells work really, really hard to fly. They need a lot of oxygen, but that doesn't give them any more ability to fly. It's all about aerodynamics and really.
Is that how it's not like that, but like a heart and like
That heart defects or damage to the heart. Israel, your question?
Yeah, when birds fly to stay, because I know when they're in the air and air can change with them, when you climb and everything, when birds fly and they suck in oxygen, do they hold that to stay lighter?
No, that's not how you handle it. No, they just breathe in and out just to get oxygen in their cells, but not to change how heavy or light they are. All right, we gotta move on. The eggs. So, I went to the grocery store this morning and bought some eggs.
Eggs.
If I put these in the oven, put some moisture in there at 99 degrees for a few days, are they gonna hatch?
No,
No.
because they're all
No,
Is there
they won't. Why won't these eggs hatch?
Because
Not-
they're
the
green.
answer?
Yeah.
they're unfertilized.
Yeah, they're not fertilized. So these eggs were never fertilized. They never could grow into an embryo. These come from what kind of bird?
Chicken.
Chicken.
A cock.
Okay? So chickens will continue, the females will lay eggs even if they're not fertilized. And so people collect the eggs and that's what they put at the grocery store.
What if
How do they be, on the place where these chickens are being raised, these hens, that's a female chicken, how do they make sure they're not fertilized?
put them in an incubator?
They keep
No.
them away from other male chickens?
Yeah, they keep them away from what's a male chicken called? A rooster. So if you keep the rooster away, obviously, there's no way that those eggs can get fertilized inside the female because there's no rooster to do that. And so, but they continue to lay eggs, but they're just not fertilized, so they won't grow into an actual embryo. Now, sometimes if a farmer wants to get more chickens of eggs that will actually hatch, they may allow the rooster to intermingle with the hens and do their thing and fertilize some of those eggs, so then you could raise those eggs and hatch them into baby chickens.
When I was in Pakistan, I had roosters and egg chickens, and I always see them doing their thing, and it's not cool.
Okay, so yeah, all right. And did you use there were the hens that you used for eggs?
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't do it anymore. We used to get our eggs from a woman who has, I don't know, a handful of chickens at her house, and she collects the eggs and she sells them to people. It's kind of neat to get them from a farm. Matt?
If you bought eggs from a store and then you bought a rooster, would it be able to fertilize them?
No, because it has to happen when the egg is just a single cell. Before everything forms, the egg has to be fertilized before the shell and all the other parts form. So once the shell is formed, it can't be fertilized. It fertilizes a tiny little egg cell. So the way it actually happens, inside of the hen, there's a tiny little cell. If that hen mates, that sperm cell can go into that tiny cell, and then it can start to grow, and then the rest forms around that. All right, CJ. Yeah?
How can you tell if an egg, like a chicken egg, is like rotted or
Like spoil?
yeah,
No.
like not
If you crack it,
necessarily,
it
I mean,
smells
like,
nasty.
something like that in your
Or
fridge
fresh.
or something like that. I'm saying like, when it first comes out, how can you tell it's like
If it
bad
has an
egg?
embryo in it or something?
Not like
You're talking about that
with
with Wonka.
bad or something.
I don't know. I'm not sure.
Like,
Daniel?
oh, I forgot I got it.
All right, we gotta get moving on here. So, bird eggs are different from reptiles. They also have a waterproof shell, but it's a hard, brittle shell. And it's permeable to oxygen and carbon dioxide. Those gases can move in and out through the shell. And those eggs that, after they're fertilized and after the egg forms and after the eggs are laid, they need to be incubated. They need to be kept at the proper temperature and moisture in order for the embryo to develop. If they're not at the right temperature, the embryo doesn't grow. So they won't hatch into actual chickens. They have to be kept at a certain temperature. And so usually the hen will keep them at that temperature by sitting on them in the nest. But you could also take them, put them in a machine that keeps them the right temperature, and that's how you could raise and hatch chickens.
This goes back to my other question. So is the egg fertilized in the chicken?
Yes, a better way to say is the egg cell in the female can be fertilized by a sperm cell in the hen. Then the whole egg that we call an egg forms.
It's before
Yeah,
she
don't
leaves
see the
why
shell.
before
There's
she
no
leaves
shell.
the egg.
Why can't you what?
Why can't you use it?
It's not fertilized. They keep the rooster away.
But I just said that the
It can happen in the chicken. If the rooster and the hen mate and the rooster releases sperm into the hen, then it can be fertilized. But if they keep the rooster away, that doesn't happen. The egg still forms anyway and keeps coming out even though it's not fertilized. Yeah. All right. Now, Israel mentioned this a few minutes ago.
What did I mention?
You mentioned birds migrating.
Oh, yeah.
When we talk about birds are warm blood, they can tolerate a wide range of temperatures. So birds can tolerate our winter, even though it's been pretty cold. They can still live here and maintain that because they keep their own internal body temperature. So why do most birds leave the area? Holly? Yeah, food. That birds have a hard time in these conditions finding enough food to sustain themselves. You know, if they eat insects or invertebrates or even fruits and stuff, there's not much of that to find when the ground's frozen and covered in snow. So many birds will migrate to an area in which they can find more food. Tommy?
What if they lay eggs and they have to migrate?
And then the eggs certainly don't
Wait, can
survive.
they-
But they only lay eggs usually, eggs are usually laid in the spring, so they have the warm months to finish and grow.
Can they carry them?
No.
Or?
That's lions.
With like
A pelican?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was flying around and it went down into the water.
Yep.
And it flew out the fish.
Yeah, they do that.
And it was kind of
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
I have a question.
Birds have a body covered in feathers. Okay, and feathers have several purposes. Like if I say a feather, what you think of if you might find on the ground? That's called a flight feather. Those are feathers generally found in the wings, and because of their shape, they give the bird lift as it flies. But there are other types of feathers as well. Some feathers are used for insulation, to keep the bird warm. These are feathers closer to its body. And you may actually even have some of these feathers in your pillow, in your comforter, in your sleeping bag. Not on your body. What is that called? If you have, what kind of jacket or pillow is it called?
Veil.
That's filled with feathers.
A feathery.
No, there's another word for it.
Oh, I'm just gonna say feathered.
No,
Insulation.
no,
Down.
down. A down pillow or down comforter or a down jacket is filled, usually goose, with these little feathers. If you have a pillow like that, every once in a while a little feather may come out and like poke you in the face or something. And you,
yeah.
and you pull it out. Now they don't look like a feather you find on the ground that's shaped, like this. What do they look like? It's all kind of curly. What they do is they trap, when a whole bunch of them, they trap little pockets of air, which is what insulation is, trapping pockets of air.
Are those feathers like as soft as whatever the regular pillows are?
Is there?
Yeah, sometimes softer. Down is good for like people go backpacking and stuff because you can smush it down into like a small container. Like if you have a sleeping bag, you're gonna go take it with you in the woods. If it's down, filled with down, it's really compressible.
So, I was watching this video and there's like this black bird and he was like he was near a swamp or something and he would use his feathers to cover his face from the sun
Oh, really?
and then he would go down in the water and catch fishes
Yeah.
and then he'll pop his head back up and then go back under.
Yeah, birds do all sorts of. Some birds dive way down in the water to catch fish, like you said. Some birds have like an oil they put over their feathers to make them waterproof. Birds have all sorts of interesting adaptations to get the food they need. Holly?
My 6th grade teacher last year, Mr. Arnold, who was a science teacher, he had a down jacket.
Oh, yeah. All right, we gotta get moving here. CJ, quick.
To go back to Matt's question.
Yes.
Like so if they're like yolks in.
Yes, we're gonna talk about that. All right, Archaeopteryx. Archaeopteryx is the name of a fossil, famous fossil. And it was a fossil of a bird-like creature. Her name means ancient bird. It's about the size of a crow. And it was preserved in rock that's very, very fine sediment. And so the details were preserved very well. And this fossil, Archaeopteryx, is what helped scientists confirm what they thought, that birds actually branched off and evolved from reptiles. Because Archaeopteryx has some characteristics that are like a bird and some characteristics like a reptile. It's kind of an in-between. We call that a transitional fossil. This is kind of what the actual fossil looks like. You could even see the feathers were fossilized, the impression of the feathers, so it's very, very detailed. This is probably what it looked like in real life. And so it obviously has feathers, that makes it bird-like. But at the end of its wings, you can see here, it had claws at the end of its wings. Modern birds don't have that, but reptiles do have claws like that. It had scales covering its head and neck and its legs, like reptiles do. Okay? Modern birds don't have scales, but it did have scales. It had a jaw with actual teeth in it, like a reptile. Birds don't have teeth. They don't have a jaw like that, but it had some of those characteristics. So it was and they had a bony tail, which modern birds don't have.
How come birds don't still have this and they adapted differently?
Because there were different reasons why it was helpful not to have those things, so that evolved, these various adaptations.
One bird, except from that, I forgot what it's called.
Oh, like a pterodactyl?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not quite a bird because it didn't have feathers or stuff. It just sort of glided
what
through
is
the air.
it?
It's just a reptile. All right, so the Archaeopteryx of the fossil helped us understand that birds evolved from reptiles. Yes.
It's not that. I don't know.
I don't know, it's just a show. Alright, so our next section of birds is, we're going to talk about parts of an egg. We're going to start with the unfertilized egg. An egg that you might find in the grocery store. An egg that you may have eaten for breakfast this morning. So if we look at an egg and we were to look on the inside, we obviously have the shell of the egg. And I'll talk about what these parts do in a minute. For now we're just going to name them. And then right beneath that, you have that thin layer just inside the shell. It's the shell membrane. You know, if you have a hard-boiled egg, you're trying to peel it, you might have to peel that little membrane off. And sometimes it'll pain. Obviously, the yolk is the yellow part in an egg. It's in the center. And then there's another word. We would call it egg white, usually. But the actual name for that stuff is called albumin. You know, it turns white when you cook it. But it's clear when you have a raw egg. And then some other parts that maybe you haven't really thought about. Surrounding the yolk, and keeping it all intact, is called the yolk membrane. That's when, if you're making like whatever, poached eggs or a fried egg, you don't want the yolk to run all over, you try not to rupture that membrane until you dunk your toast in it or whatever.
Toast.
Yeah, trying to make hard-boiled eggs, it doesn't work. It's all like, the yolk like cooks too fast.
You cooked it too long. Here's my key to making a perfect hard-boiled egg. Put the eggs in cold water. Yeah, you just said hard-boiled.
No, I meant,
Fried?
no, yeah, the one where you shove things in the
Scrambled?
yolk.
Alright.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Alright,
No.
take your pot, put your eggs in the bottom, cover it with cold water. Put it on the stove. Turn up the heat to high.
Yeah.
Wait till it boils. Okay? Boil for 3 minutes. Turn it off and just let it come back to room temperature. Then you take the eggs out. They'll be perfectly cooked. They won't have a green, you know, that green layer on the yolk that's kind of gross and yeah.
Wait,
Yeah.
what green?
Sometimes if you overcook eggs, there's like the outer yolk membrane turns like green. But when they're overcooked, they're all kind of greeny.
Oh.
Yeah. All right. Anyway, this is not a cooking show. At one end of the egg, the larger end is a little section called the air space.
When you crack it, you see that.
Yeah, when you crack the egg, you will. If you look in the shell, you see like a little bubble in the larger end of the egg.
Oh yeah, on the top.
Yep. And then lastly, probably you've never noticed it, but you will tomorrow. If you look at the yolk, if you crack an egg and then you look at the yolk, there will be a small white patch. That's the blastoder. We'll talk about what it is. And then lastly, the chiles, did I mention those?
Yeah, no.
Those are these stringy things attached to the yolk.
We could not pronounce that.
Yeah.
Because, you know, the salt.
So it's eight.
Yeah, because that's the same. Chilesi, I guess, chilesi is plural. Chileza is one.
Like red.
All right, so let's talk about what these things do. The shell is obviously the outer layer. It's made of calcium. And actually, as the embryo is growing inside of the egg, the shell starts to dissolve, and the calcium in the shell is used to form the bones of the chick.
Wait, this is the fertilized?
This is unfertilized.
Yeah, so why are we forming bones in the...
Well, if it is fertilized. The shell membrane, that thin layer underneath the shell, that's a barrier so that bacteria can't get into the egg. The air space, that little bubble at the one on the egg, that acts as sort of a shock absorber. In case the egg gets jarred, it helps it, prevents it from getting damaged. Also, when the embryo is about to be born, when the chick is about to be born, it pokes its beak into that little aerosol and takes its first breath. Pokes its beak in the aerosol, takes its first breath, and then starts working its way out of the shell.
Hold on, I'm so
We
confused.
just went over the yolk. What did we say the yolk is for?
It's
Calcium.
providing it with
Nutrients, fats, vitamins, minerals for the embryo.
I'm so confused, Mr. Ross.
Ow.
What do you think?
Why are we doing that? Like,
Yeah, because we're just saying those parts are still in the unfertilized egg, but when we're talking about what they do, they're all useful to the embryo if it were fertilized. Holly?
Okay, so when we talk about the part, the
Yep.
shell, the thing I can
Yep.
pronounce, is that why eggs are good source of protein?
We'll get there and then I'll tell you that in a second. The yolk membrane just keeps the yolk together. Those stringy things, have you ever noticed them in an egg? Like if you crack their eyes?
Yeah.
They're kind of attached to the yolk.
oh yeah.
They are made of protein, and basically they stretch across the egg, and they hold the yolk in the middle so it doesn't like sink to the bottom. They're kind of like ropes holding the yolk in place. They're made of protein.
Would
They
you
turn
see
white
those if
when
you
you-
made like hard-boiled eggs?
Once it's cooked, you wouldn't see it.
You wouldn't?
No.
Because
You see it in the raw egg.
hard-boiled eggs, and I've never seen.
Yeah, it just kind of blends in with the egg white because it's all white. The albumin, that's the egg white. This is protein. This is why eggs are a good source of protein, because albumin is made of a mixture of water and protein. And, you know, it's also why people trying to maybe eat a little healthier might have an egg white omelet instead of a regular omelet. Because if you take out the yolk, well, you're removing the fat from the egg, but you still have a good source of protein when you just eat the egg white. So, I know.
Do you think you remember that movie when we was watching it? You remember what that hamburger that kid died?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay, because with a raw egg or anything, could you die from that?
Well, sometimes eggs can carry bacteria, salmonella specifically, and so that's why, you know, they say you shouldn't eat like raw cookie dough because it has eggs in it. I know everyone's probably eating it, but
Everybody does.
it's a small possibility, but there is a possibility there are bacteria that could make you sick. So it's small, but it is possible. The blastoderm, that little patch of white that's on the yolk, that's what, if it were fertilized, would grow into the actual embryo. That little tiny patch. That's where sperm would enter, okay, when it's inside of the hen and start forming the embryo. And that cell would start to divide and become bigger and bigger, so it eventually form the whole embryo.
I have a question. Has there ever been like, okay, I know this is gonna sound so stupid.
All right, hurry up.
But like, okay, so is there like ever been like somewhere like if like
Seeing a lot of lights.
All right.
like okay, so the male, the rooster, like releases. Okay, and then like so it was supposed to like, and then there's one fertilized egg and one unfertilized egg. Has that happened?
I'm not sure. I don't know if that's happening. All right. This is what things start to look like after an egg is fertilized after a few days. So here we have the embryo, which is the baby chick starts to develop and get larger. It's still very, very small though. The yolk is still in the middle.
Is that food?
The albumin, yep. The egg white's still all around the outside. But then we have some new structures start to form. The allantois is this membrane here. And then surrounding the embryo is called the amnion, a little bubble surrounding the embryo. The embryo is the developing chick. The allantois, that's a waste. That gets rid of waste from the chick. And the amnion is basically a little shock absorber. Keeps that little bubble, keeping it safe.
There's a lot of shock absorber.
Yeah, the air cell and the amnion are both shock absorbers. For the embryo. And so if we look a little closer, again, we have the embryo, the amnion. This is the yolk down here. This is the allantois up here. And you see inside of it, these are vessels. Because these vessels lead into the embryo. So they allow the embryo to absorb those nutrients from the yolk. They're called the yolk vessels. Eventually, towards the end of its development, the yolk actually goes inside of the chick. The atlantoid vessels, again, they carry waste. And if we look at different stages in the development of that embryo, you go from, very small, 5 days, 10 days, 15, 20. What happens to the yolk as the embryo grows?
Last to last.
Yeah, it gets smaller because it's being used up. Same thing with the albumin. Until eventually they say just the chick in there. Now, hold on one second. You don't have this slide. So the eggs we usually eat are unfertilized, but fertilized duck or chicken eggs are common food. Some parts of the world as well. It's called blue. You can get them at like a little store at the mall or on the street or whatever. And these are actual, there's an embryo inside of the egg. And they're boiled, and then you eat the embryo. You sip the broth out of the egg, and then you eat the embryo inside. Kind of like a clam, yeah. Yeah, that's the embryo. That's what you eat. You eat the chicken and all the inside. Yeah. What? This is what they're serving today. Blue is on the menu. This one?
No, the next one over. Yeah.
They serve with soy sauce.
Does it actually taste good?
People like it. It must taste good. They won't eat it if it tastes so bad, I guess.
Well,